Hello and welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Andrea Renee Knits, and it's a little weekly podcast where I try not to spill my coffee and I answer some questions, usually about knitting, but we also get into things like spinning every once in a while, and who knows what'll come up. Today I am wearing my Free Your Fade shawl. This is an oldie but a goodie from like Jeepers. I don't even know, 2016, 2017, it's been a while. And I pulled it out because it's going to come into play a little later. And I was like, dang, I love this shawl. And so that's always fun. It's always fun when you pulled out an oldie but a goodie and you're like, oh yeah, forgot about this one. This is knit up in Ching fiber, a single ply, and I just love, especially this light one it ends with. So pretty. Okay. Let's jump into some questions. Question number 1 is about designing and inspiration. Sometimes when I have completed a knitting project that I enjoy very much, most recently the Douglas cardi, yay, I have difficulty finding inspiration for the next project. Usually I have some projects in mind when I'm knitting another, but then after I've completed something, I feel somehow empty and can't seem to find a new project. Nothing feels right. Do you have these kinds of feelings after designing and completing a new design? If so, how do you get over it, or how does the inspiration for a new knitting project arise? So I loved this question because I feel like it's a good community question of what do we do when we kind of lose our knitting mojo? Or you know what it reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of when you read a really good book or watch a great film or series, and you're so invested in the characters and the story that when it ends, you just feel like, oh, it's over. I feel like there's this hole in my life now that I need to fill. So that's kind of what it reminded me of. And for me, it's interesting. Sometimes with a design, I think because I need to write the pattern at the end. So the way I design is I come up with the idea, I knit it, and then I write the pattern. So a lot of times by the time I've written the pattern, I'm ready to be done with it. Because I kind of save, the computer work for the end. And if you know me, I don't really love computer work. But so sometimes I am just ready to be done with it. A lot of times one design sparks an idea for the next design. So I actually just finished up 2 designs which are hanging out next to me right now. And one was 100% sparked by the other. And I was so excited when I finished one because I was like, oh, okay, now I'm going to do this other idea that I have. So I'm also somebody, I tend to knit multiples. So I know a lot of knitters are one and done. They knit the thing one time, they don't think about it again, they're done with it. I am curious and I tend to go to this place of like, ooh, but what if I use this yarn now, or this combination, or what if I change this, or well, I like this, but now I want it with long sleeves or short sleeves, or I want it as a cardigan, or so I want to try a cowl instead of a shawl, or a shawl instead of a cowl. I just tend to want to keep to like riffing on something. So that is one thing that kind of keeps me going. But for when I am in that inspiration lull, which definitely can happen, that's when I usually turn to like my books, or sometimes I'll look at Pinterest or Instagram hashtags. I do the hashtags more for sewing. So that might be a good, since I come to knitting at a different angle, since I do design, sewing might be a better comparison for me, where I definitely get inspiration to find new sewing patterns on Instagram, because it's a great way to see what other people are sewing and see it on different people, how they chose to do it. And one thing I do love to do is I follow hashtags. So there are certain, especially if I like, you can even follow pattern hashtags. So I'll do that if there's a pair of pants or something I want to sew. I'll follow the hashtag so I can see different ways people go about sewing it. So I think that could definitely apply to knitting as well. But I would love for anybody else to chime in of like, what do you do when you're in a little bit of a lull, or you're getting into your next pattern. One thing I will say that can come up for me, like you had mentioned that sometimes you have ideas while you're knitting something of what you might want to do next, but then you kind of finish your one pattern and there's a little bit of that lull. And I wonder if part of it is, do you not enjoy the starting of the next project? Because I can definitely have starter's procrastination because some projects, like my sad empty loom over here, they have this lead up work that you need to do in the beginning before you can do some of the quote unquote fun stuff. So for knitters, that can be swatching. They don't love to swatch. And so that can put them into that kind of procrastination mindset. They want to do the project, but they just want to get to the fun part where they're already knitting the thing. So maybe finding ways to make some of those beginning steps more fun. Like I do try to frame swatching as it's more knitting. You know, it is fun. It's such a great way to see what is going to happen with the yarn. It's going to show you, do I really like this yarn? Do I like this color combination if you're using more than one color? And I will admit, it can be a step I often want to like rush through or push through. But what stinks more is when you have rushed that and then you're halfway through a project and you're like, oh, I'm not totally happy with like my yarn choice, or my needle, my gauge isn't quite right, or whatever it may be. So I do try to get myself to this place mentally of enjoying every step. Dressing a loom takes a whole day, so I might as well enjoy that process. And cutting out a sewing pattern and ironing and all those things, I find a way to make it fun for myself. Even if it's just like, oh, okay, this part can be a little tedious, but I can throw on my audiobook and, you know, make it fun. But if it is just about, you don't mind any of that, it's really more about picking the next project. Sometimes we get a little bit of decision fatigue, and so we need things to help kind of have us have less of a decision to make. So taking out some of the extraneous stuff. So you could keep a queue, like on Ravelry, you can put together a queue of things you want to knit. You could do a folder on your phone. Sometimes with sewing things, when I know I'm like, I have no time to do this right now, but I don't want to forget about this pattern, I will save the link to the pattern in the notes on my phone. And that way, when I'm like, oh, what do I want to do? I'll go to that note and open those up, and that'll help me be like, oh yeah, I forgot about these. And sometimes it's been long enough that I'm like, nope, I actually don't want to make that anymore, which is great because now I didn't invest all the time and supplies to make the thing I wouldn't have wanted. Or if I still want to make it, it's like, okay, I know I really want to add this to my wardrobe because I've waited all this time and I still want to make it. Another thing I will do is I look for holes in my wardrobe. So I go see, okay, what do I wish I had that I don't have that I can make? You know, the other day we were out, we went on a little day trip with my in-laws and my family, and the whole time I was like, man, why didn't I bring a shawl or a cowl? And I have plenty of those things, but it also helps spark that, ooh, that sounds fun to make. Maybe I need a new one to get me excited to remember to bring it along on my trip. Oh, I had one more, but it disappeared. So there's some of my ideas. I would love to hear all of yours because I do think that this can be a really common thing. Oh, last tip I'll give is, you said the last thing you made was the Douglas cardi. So sometimes what is really, really nice is, now that you just made a big cardigan, why not bust out a hat or a pair of socks or a cowl, something a little smaller that doesn't take quite so much to finish it. Even just like, it takes less yarn. So that can help minimize the decisions. Like maybe you're just going to make a one color something. I also have my go-to projects that I know I enjoy knitting every single time. So that tends to be like my Harlow hat, my DRK Everyday socks, a Traveler or DRK Everyday cowl, those things that I'm like, okay, I don't want to have to think too hard. I just want to get something back on my needles. And then while you're knitting something that's kind of your comfort knit, your mind can wander and be like, okay, what do I really want to like invest as my next big knit? So having smaller little appetizer knits to get you ready for your next big meal of a knit could be helpful as well. So I hope those are helpful, and otherwise, I hope everyone will chime in on what they do if they're feeling a little bit of a lull in their mojo, or just what helps keep them inspired. The next question is about the traveler shawl, and I'm just going to take a quick sip of my coffee. All right, traveler shawl. I just started knitting a traveler shawl. How many times can I say traveler shawl? But using fingering yarns. I'm still going to knit the larger size, and I'm thinking of continuing part 1 until I feel like that's big enough. But how can I find out the right number of stitches to pick up for section 2? So the traveler shawl is knit. It has a really fun construction. That's my favorite part about that shawl, is you knit one triangle and then you bind it off, and then you're right at the perfect point to pick up stitches for your second triangle. So it's actually pretty easy. I would just pick up 1 stitch for every 1 stitch of your I-cord. That's really it. And then you'll have the 3 on hold that you started with to have your other I-cord edging. But you just go, as you're working along that I-cord, I wish I had an I-cord, but if you kind of look on here, block my face, this isn't the best example, but there's like 1 slip stitch per edge. So I would just pick up a stitch every single one of those. So when you're looking at your I-cord, it's going to be a tube that looks like it's 3 stitches making a tube. And for every V, pick up a stitch and you should be fine. All right. The nice thing about that shawl is it's just garter stitch. Well, basically. It's a kind of a garter. It's a knit and purl pattern, but it isn't super stitch count dependent. You're just going to decrease for longer because you're going to pick up more stitches. Okay. Question number 3. I'm a longtime knitter and started spinning last year. I want to use my hand spun for knitting, but I don't want all the time and precious fibers to go to waste due to me not making the hand spun good enough. I know about plies and twist adding durability, yet there are lace weight single ply commercial yarns out there that do a solid job. In the back of my head, there was always your story about your husband who has worn through a sweater in no time at all, and I recall you mentioning it was a plying issue. Would you please tell us your cautious tale so we can learn from it? Otherwise, I am afraid I will spin wire until the end of my days out of fear my knitwear will fall apart if I don't. So basically, to sum this up, if I'm reading it correctly, is they are worried that their hand spun doesn't have enough twist, doesn't have enough durability to it, that they're going to knit it, but then they're going to wear a hole in whatever they knit real quick because it's going to kind of fall apart. So here's my tale of woe. and I think this will help you feel better. So because it's at the top of my mind, I'm going to start with a tip first because I don't want to forget it after I tell my tale of woe. Always, the easiest, simplest thing you can do while spinning to check your singles to make sure there's enough twist is just do a tug test. So as you're spinning, especially if you're doing long draw or like support spindle spinning, do a test, tug it. If it falls apart, there's not enough twist and it will fall apart as a yarn. So just do a tug test. Make sure that when you tug it, you feel like it's staying together. It's got a nice little, it's okay. And then continue on your way. Okay. So what happened was I knit my husband a sweater. I knit him a sweater that I have the same sweater and I just knit it for him in his size. I still have my sweater. My sweater doesn't have a single hole. It is still in great shape. I use the same exact yarn for both sweaters. So what happened? Why did his fall apart in like a month or 2? It was very sad. And he kept wearing it. It was like, it looked like it had been shredded by an animal. And he's just walking around with this yarn hanging off of him. And finally I had to be like, you can't wear that around me anymore. First of all, if anyone saw you in this shredded, sad sweater, and it just makes me too sad. You can't wear it anymore. But I think he actually still might even have it. But here's what happened. it actually wasn't the yarn's fault. I was using a loosely, I say that lightly. I was using a woolen spun yarn that can definitely pull apart quite easy. But my sweater's still fine. So what happened was when I knit my sweater, it was a few years before I knit his, and I used to knit English style. I then switched to knitting continental style in between the time I knit mine and I knit his. I didn't gauge swatch because it was my own pattern. I didn't think I needed to gauge. I'm like, I've already knit it. I wrote the pattern. Like, I know the gauge. It didn't even occur to me, even though I know that most people's gauge will change and possibly drastically when switching from one style of knitting to another. But I just didn't even think about it. I knit that sweater for him in a week while I was traveling as a surprise for his birthday. So I cut corners and did not gauge swatch. And what really was the culprit was I knit it. It ended up being that my tension was a lot looser than the first go round. And my husband does have a tendency to wear holes in clothes. I don't know. Maybe he's got some sharp elbows and knees, but he just does. And so I think it was a combination of his tendency to maybe sometimes get some worn areas in his clothing, plus my loose gauge and a loosely spun yarn. Now, I will say he still to this day is like, I want another one of those sweaters. It was the warmest sweater of my life. Like, he loved it because it was so warm, because it was a woolen spun yarn. And now I just know, okay, if I'm going to knit another sweater for him out of woolen spun yarn, I need to compensate for that area or spin depending on the yarn. There are some woolen yarns that still have, like, they're not just going to drift apart. But I need to check that yarn, and if necessary, I really need to watch my gauge, because what happens is when you tighten up your gauge a little bit, it actually helps reinforce the yarn as you knit it, creating a stronger fabric. So it's the softer spun yarn plus the larger gauge that created the issue with that knit then wanting to break down. It didn't stand a chance with his sharp elbow with that combo. If I had knit it at the gauge that I was supposed to, I think it would have been fine, at least for a solid couple of years before it fell to pieces. So I hope that helps a little bit. Don't fear it. Use your hand spun. And here is why. 2 things. It will bring you so much joy. There's just nothing like knitting your own hand spun. It is this magical thing. Every time I knit with my hand spun, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. It is full of energy, your energy. It's just magical. So do it. But also, reason number 2, you will learn so much about your hand spun once you knit it or use it, whatever way you want to. Crochet, knitting, weaving, whatever you want to do with it. Use it, because using it will teach you about your hand spun, and it might teach you, I'm putting too much twist in. I'm not putting enough twist in. I prefer this fiber. I prefer this many plies. Like, it's just, that is one of the things that has taught me the most on my spinning journey, is using my hand spun. So I hope you do. And trust it. If you're doing a little tug test, it's going to be fine. And if you are worried about it, let's say you did make a really lofty, lightly spun woolen spun yarn, use it for a lower abrasion project. You know, you're never going to want to knit socks out of a woolen spun yarn. So you can kind of pick where on your butt. You might want to use it for a hat where it's not going to get as much wear and tear as a sweater that you're going to wash more often. Or, as I said, socks or something like that, that's just going to be, have more abrasion chances. Okay, a cowl would be lovely. All right, next question. Okay. I have a question for you about swatches. I have been knitting up a storm for 4 years, and I'm getting to a point where I'm finding yarns that I love to work with, and I come back to using them over and over again. My question for you is, Can you save swatches of yarn to measure gauge of the same yarn for a different project if the gauge swatch calls for the same stitch pattern, say stockinette knit flat, or should you knit up a new swatch every time? I tend to discard my swatches to save space, but I'm wondering if I should start hanging on to them if they would be useful again. So I have a few thoughts on this one. Number one, if you kept your final project, you don't need to keep your swatch because your final project is a giant swatch. So if you don't want to keep the clutter of those swatches, or if you needed to use up that yarn because you were low in the project, you had to use up every little bit, your final project can be your swatch. So you don't have to keep the actual little swatch unless you want to. And now I think for the bigger question that we're really asking here is, do you have to re-swatch the same yarn again and again? Here are things to think about. Quick answer, no, you don't have to. You can, especially like there are some things that I have used a lot that I know pretty well what I'm going to achieve with that yarn and needle combo. But there is something that I noticed you left out of there is you didn't talk about the needle size. I'm assuming that was implied, but don't forget that that is important. So there are a lot of us designing with maybe the same yarn and we're all using different needle sizes. We all knit differently. So that's one thing to consider, is where you could probably get away with that the best is if you are using the same yarn and needle combo that you've already used for a design from the same designer as the next pattern you're going to knit. If you're not, that's just something to think about. Here's the other thing that I found so interesting that I learned in the past few years is, are you going to use the same color? Dye plays a part in the final diameter of the yarn, and it can affect your gauge. So I have used yarns in different colors, all the same yarn base from all the same dyer, dyed up with different colors, and certain colorways were thicker and heavier than others because of the dye. I was like, whoa, I didn't expect that. There's probably dyers out there who are like, old news. But it was new to me. It was new news to me. So that is one thing I would think of. The next thing I will tell you is, if you got a whole bunch, maybe you just have a favorite colorway of this one yarn from this one company and you have got multiple sweater quantities of it because you love it. It is your go-to. And you bought it all at one time. Your gauge probably isn't going to change hugely. But you might be surprised how much a yarn can change from batch to batch. Because every time a new batch is spun up and dyed, things change. The wool that was grown is different than the wool that you first had. And so there can be these little discrepancies that might have an effect. You might also change. Your hand strength might change. The amount of stress in your life might change, for better or worse, where you're knitting tighter or looser. So is it a good practice to swatch again? Yes. But you do you. I won't judge you. You can decide for yourself. Just know that if I were to skip it, I would definitely check my working gauge in my project once I'm partway through, just to make sure I am still hitting the target I want to hit. It would behoove you to take good notes of your previous projects. And one thing that I always love to do and recommend doing is measuring your swatch before and after blocking. You can also do that with the final project. It can be really interesting to see how much something grows after blocking. So even, let's say you knit a sweater, measure your sweater, then block it, then measure it again. But what that information will give you if you write that down is, let's say you decide to skip the swatch. Well, if you know your pre-blocked gauge, as you're knitting your project that you decided to skip the swatch for, you can then measure your project after you have a decent amount of knitting there and check your pre-blocked gauge in your notes from the last time you used that yarn and needle combo and make sure you haven't changed. So that's what I think I would do to give myself that insurance of knowing, okay, I know I'm still hitting the markers I want to hit. So those are my tips. I love this question. I've actually answered a similar question in the past, and I love it because I had the same thought. And Brooklyn Tweed is one of my favorite yarns. I love a woolen spun yarn. And so early in my design career, whenever I could get my hands on some Brooklyn Tweed, I loved to knit with it. And I thought, well, I'm just going to knit up. I'm going to take Loft, their fingering weight, and I'm going to knit it up. I'm going to knit a swatch on like a size 3, a size 4, and a size 5. And I'm just going to keep these swatches, and now I know. Well, I only ever did the one color like that. And then I thought, okay, I can do that for shelter, and I'll do a 6, a 7, and an 8 size needle. And I thought I was going to save myself so much time. I never went back to those swatches. I always ended up needing to do a fresh swatch, whether it be because I was changing up stitch patterns, or who even knows where those swatches are anymore. But I have had the same idea. So I definitely know where you're coming from. So those would be my tips. All right, we are to the last question of the day. I'm almost done with my traveler cowl made out of hand spun. Hooray! Congratulations. And want to squeeze in one more project for the March to May knit along. We are almost to our last month of the knit along. We've got basically just about a week. Oh, yeah, a week. A week and a month left. So we still have plenty of time for another project. It's like 5 weeks. Okay, so I have 2 sets of rainbow colored fingering weight mini skeins, 2 minis in each color of the rainbow, about 900 yards, and wonder which of your shawls would best utilize this stash yarn. I'm happy to add a contrast color or hold yarns together. I especially love your garter brioche combos. So the first thing that came into my mind was free or fade. I love free or fade because you could either fade your rainbow colors, especially since you have mini skeins. You can do that with marling, kind of like I did in the Embrace cowl, where you can hold 2 strands of like your first color. So I'm just going to do 5 because it's easy. So let's say you have 5 colors. I know you said how many you have, but oh, you didn't. Okay. So let's pretend you have 5, even though that's not how many colors are in the rainbow. We're not going to worry about it. So let's say you have 5 colors. You would hold 2 strands of color A. Then you would drop 1, and then you would hold 1 strand of A and 1 strand of B and knit for a little bit. And then drop A completely and do 2 strands of B. Drop 1 B, add in a C. Drop the other B, 2 of C. And you would just keep going like that, marling along the way. Or you could do stripes, you could do color blocking, you can do whatever you want. But I obviously designed it for fading, but it doesn't have to be fading. You can ignore the fading and do what you want to do. The nice thing is you can knit it to the size you want to. Like anytime, once you run out of yarn, like let's say you want to use up every single bit of those mini skeins, just keep going till you're getting close to the end. Make sure you have enough, keep a decent sized little ball to do your picot bind off, because that can be a yarn eater. But otherwise, keep on going till you've got like one of those mini skeins left, and then do your picot bind off. And that'll kind of maximize your yarn. So that's what came to me. That's my suggestion, is free or fade. So I will put a link for that below, as I always do. Show and tell time. As I said, there is about 5 weeks left in the DRK March to May. It is enough time if you want to knit my newest sweater broom. My testers were so dang speedy on that sweater, you could get it done. So I do challenge anyone who wants to jump in for these last 5 weeks of the sweater. You could do broom, you could get it done. So March to May knit along is still going on. DRK spin it to knit it knit along is still happening. I cannot wait to get back to knitting my handspun traveler. It was on pause while I had a ton of knitting work to do. I had to only focus on my knitting that was for work. So that is my project for the summer that I'm hoping to use like when we travel and stuff, my relaxing knit. So we have that going on. We have a whole year that goes till February of next year. So plenty of time for that. And then we also have the 100 days of long draw. Today is the 26th day of the challenge. Oh, I'll just start with this story. This is story time, so feel free to grab your beverage and join me for a little story. So I need to turn off my coffee mug. I was having a problem with my wheel. It was squeaking. And if you know, you know. You know what a squeak can do to your spinning time. You try to ignore it. You try to throw in headphones and just pretend it's not happening, but you can still hear it. You can feel it. You know, every time you treadle, you can just hear this. You know, it is like the heart under the floorboard. Like it's just won't stop beating and it slowly drives you mad. So I had a squeak that kind of turned into a squeak and a thump. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? So I had already had a squeaky issue with this wheel before, and it was because I'd carried my wheel up the 2 flights of stairs to my studio, and I must have just knocked it a little bit. So it kind of tilted the drive wheel a little. So once I realized that was the issue, I rebalanced it, easy peasy, and it was fine. And it was good for a while. Well, I thought, okay, that must have happened again because I carried it back downstairs and set up my whole long draw station. So I rebalanced the wheel, nothing changes. It's still squeaking. So basically this whole challenge, I have been kind of avoiding. I've been avoiding it because I'm so annoyed by the squeak. So thankfully, I mean, I've definitely got my spindles going on. Here's a whole bunch of I'm doing a sweaters quantity on my spindles. So that's been keeping me busy. I showed you my stickle bats from a little while ago. I actually still need to apply those. So I did have my spindles going to keep doing my long draw, but I really wanted to focus on long draw on a wheel because I just had 100 days of basically long draw and spindles. So I really wanted to challenge myself to get back to the wheel and work on my technique there. So thankfully, spinning friends and knitting friends are the best of friends. And so my spinning friends came over. We had a little spinning hangout, and 2 of them have the same wheel as me. And with their help, we figured it out. And we rebalanced. I did need to rebalance the drive wheel again, but then it was one little screw. One itty bitty, inconspicuous little screw was making it so that my footmen were a little wobbly. So that's where the knocking started to come into place. Oh my gosh. And I had already tightened every other screw I could think of. And of course, it was this one innocuous one that I never would have really looked at. So thank you. Thank you, friends who helped me. Thanks, Mel and Becca. You saved me. And now this whole week, it's all I want to do. I have to say, Andrea, have to go do your work before you're allowed to do your spinning, because now it's just so much fun and such a relief, and I am cruising. I finished one bobbin. I'm almost second with another, which will be 2 bats of my 6 down. So anyways, now I'm doing it and I'm feeling really good about it. I feel like I'm getting a lot more confident with my long draw, which is so exciting because just like spindle spinning, long draw was really intimidating for me. It just feels like you have less control, and I sometimes can be a bit of a type A. A little bit. I like the control. I like to have control over my life. So long draw can feel like you're letting your hair down. You don't have as much control. But now I feel like I understand it. And so I do feel like I'm in control. And I'm having so much fun with it. So thank goodness for that. So that was my story time. Now let's do show and tell. So last week I showed my fun guts that I got from Melly Knits. So you can peek at that last episode, but basically what it was a bag of washed locks and some recycled sari silk, and you process it yourself. So you can do drum carder, whatever. I did drum carder, and you basically get to make your own chaos bat, which a chaos bat from Melly Knits kind of, I happen to have one right here. This is a new mega bat. This is a chaos bat. This one's so pretty. Oh my gosh. Anyways, so they're one of my favorite things from Melly. They are so beautiful. So I basically got to make my own, and I will tell you what, it is pure chaos, and I love it. So I did this morning. I picked open all my locks, and I threw it on the drum carder. I ended up doing 4 passes. Here she is. Ooh la la. This is if I was tech savvy, that's the word. If I was tech savvy right now, I would have clapping in the background. But here she is. Here she is. She's so beautiful. And I can't wait to start spinning her. I think I might spin that. And I think I might even have to try a little bit today because I'm so curious. It is Shetland and Sorry Silk. So that was so much fun. So that's one of my show and tells. My other show and tell, I'm actually going to show you my knitting. I never get to show you my knitting because it's always a design. And I always feel like I have to keep it secret until it's released. This is a new design. This is coming out in June, but you're not going to be able to tell what it is because it's only a hem. And this is my second one. So if you know me, you know that I love color. I really like color. I tend to go color, but in the past couple months, I've knit not one, but 2 gray sweaters. So the first version of this is gray. It is a light silver gray. It's probably one of my favorite not color colors. But then I was like, okay, now I want to do another one and I'm going to make it fun. So I was playing with yarn from the Farmer's Daughter Fibers, and they have this new cotton confluence. No, I always say it backwards. Confluence cotton, which is a wool yarn with some cotton in it. And I will tell you right now, it is delightful to knit with. So I knew I wanted to use that, especially because I'm picturing this as more of, I won't say summertime, like I'm not going to wear this like a tank top. It is still, it's kind of, think of it more like a sweatshirt, and to pull on in those cool mornings or crisp evenings. But so I ordered up some colors because I was like, okay, what color do I want to use? And at first my plan was just to hold 1 strand of the cotton with 1 strand of Odang lace. So I got a few different colors, and they're all hanging out, and they're hanging out near each other. And I see these 2 near each other, and immediately it was like, I love this combo so much, and I want to see what happens when I combine them. And this, my friends, this is what happens. And I am here for it. I can't wait to watch this grow. I'm so excited. So anyways, that is what I'm knitting. I got all of my other knits cleared off the needles this week. I am caught up on all my knits. So that feels really good. And it has my design brain excited because I'm done and dusted for my current designs, except for the second sample I'm doing for the June release. But that feels so exciting. So gotta think about what I'm gonna make next. But that is my show and tell. I showed you my bat. I showed you this. I didn't bring up a bobbin. The yarn I'm spinning for the 100 days of long draw, it's kind of like showing you these guys. Like, I know there are some of you out there who appreciate brown undyed fiber on a little bobbin, but I know that some of you are like, not the most exciting show and tell. My big spin I'm doing is also gray. Lots of gray going on. So anyways, I'll post a picture of it on Instagram. I probably already have. But there you go. There's my show and tell. That's what I'm up to. I'd love to hear what you're up to, what you're making. Oh, okay, here's a question for all of you. I might even throw this one up in like a survey. That's the word, on Instagram, so you can just click one. But what I am curious about is, there are always people who they don't knit during the summer because they think of it as like a fall or winter activity. My thought has always been, well, of course I'm going to knit during the summer because I want to have my sweaters done and ready to wear in the fall. And then I was thinking about the yarn people choose to knit with depending on the season. So like if I'm knitting to be done by the fall, I'm knitting wool yarns during the summer. But I know other people are probably choosing summertime yarns to knit with during the summer, even though they probably want to be wearing those yarns in the summer. This is where my brain goes while I'm up here in my studio working away on things. It's like, Anyways, I just love to hear what you think. What do you do? Do you knit summertime yarns in the summer? Do you stop knitting during the summer? Are some of your crafts seasonal? Like, I will say I'm I do a lot more sewing in the spring. For some reason, that is when I want to sew. And spinning tends to pick up for me in the rest of the year. Although now spinning's kind of becoming everyday for me, just like knitting. But anyways, I'd love to hear. What do you want your crafting schedule to look like? Do seasons play a role, or do you just let it ride? Let me know. All right, I am going to go get back to work. I hope that you have a fantastic weekend, and I hope to see you back here next week. Happy making.